Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome. Thank you so much for trekking it out here on this rainy day. We're going to get straight into it. Times are tough. And managers today, between hybrid work, shrinking budgets, changing employee needs, and AI, have their work cut out for them. Now, our panel today represents an incredible group of leaders across several industries, and they're here to offer their perspective on the state of affairs. Panelists, if I could please ask you to introduce yourselves to the audience and share a little bit about what you do, and then we'll dive right into the questions. Rose, I'll start with you.
I'm Rose Fass. I'm with a company called Fast Forward Consulting Group. We work with Fortune 100 companies. And we work in the areas of leadership and storytelling. How to lead, learn, and how to tell your story, whether it's your strategy or your business model.
I'm Philipp Muelbert. I'm head of strategy and innovation for LHH. We are a global leader in professional talent solutions, and we work with CHROs and HR professionals on their comprehensive talent needs, covering the entire spectrum from recruitment through development through career transition.
Thank you. My name is Kelly Stuart-Johnson, and I'm the global head of learning for VML. VML is the world's largest creative company. So if you've heard of J. Walter Thompson or Young and Rubicam, we are the child of that merger. What I do is I work with all of our capabilities, all of our practices, to try and build people who can do their jobs in an era of AI. And I also try to teach managers how to make their people's everyday a lot better.
Good morning. My name is Beth Perrone, and I'm the Chief Talent Officer for Merck Pharmaceutical Companies. And I have responsibility from kind of the life cycle of all employees. I have responsibility for talent acquisition, bringing talent into the organization and moving them. I have learning and development, which is how we build capabilities and skills in our organization. And then I have global talent management, which is managing the full suite of talent offerings from succession planning, performance management, et cetera.
You all are very impressive. Very good. Jason Ashlock, Global Head of Organizational Development at Kuehne and Nagel. That's one of the world's most important companies you've never heard of. If you look around the room today, there's nothing in this room that came from here. It came from a long way away. You needed third-party and fourth-party logistics partners to get it here, and that's what we do. We're 130 years old in 100 countries, 85,000 employees, and we tell really complicated logistics stories every day. I work in organizational development, which is basically transformation, a space that's really troubled. So troubled, we call it change management because we're desperate to make it ordered. It's messy, and it's fun, and it's exciting, and it's disruptive. And finding a way to make that resonate with humans is my work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So let's start by addressing the elephant in the room. We've got budget cuts, layoffs, an uncertain economic upheaval. So we're in a state today where managers are being asked to do far more with far fewer resources. In your experience today, what are you seeing as among the most urgent needs for managers, regardless of whether they are first-time managers or seasoned? Beth, I'll start with you.
Oh, great. So one of the things at Merck that we actually are working on is directly related to this question, and that's around prioritization. And so what we're seeing is, particularly in pharma, where quite frankly, we're used to having a lot of resources available, in times where we're seeing constraints happen and there's a lot going on, we're seeing that managers and employees are being forced to make tougher decisions and prioritize the work that they're doing. And quite frankly, it's not a skill that we had historically invested in. It's something that we're now building into almost all of our development programs.
Philipp, what do you think?
Well, you spoke to one of the key ones that we see. One of the other key ones is adaptability. In an environment that's increasingly uncertain, being able to be flexible, being able to pivot, being able to challenge yourself and your teams is something that we see as absolutely critical.
So what are some key skills that you think are necessary in today's managers compared to, let's say, 10, 20 years ago? Like, how are those shifts occurring? Rose, I'm making eye contact with you.
Okay. I think years ago, there were more resources, and there was a lot more oversight, and people were in offices, and so you didn't have to make an appointment to see your boss.
Sure.
Today, you have to get on a calendar to see your boss. And I remember years ago just being able to walk in, sit down, and have a conversation. You can't do that today. So I think, getting back to your first question, which is what's shifting, I think you have this constant adage of do more with less. And my answer to that is do less because it's more. A few well-focused actions can yield significant results. And I think your point, Beth, about prioritizing, it's really how much work is really moving the needle and how much of it is just moving the mashed potatoes and peas around the plate. And when you can determine that, doing a few things well will yield a lot more than trying to do so much. So I actually have talked to our employees and most of the people that we consult with about taking it down. Pick a few big priorities that are important to you and move the needle.
And right now we are encountering an experience where we have multiple generations under the same roof. And with that comes different expectations of what is normal at work, what is expected of managers. How do you train managers to lead across a multi-generational and increasingly diverse workforce, especially when it pertains to hybrid environments? Kelly?
Sure. I think one of the things that we're seeing, and it actually relates to the last question, is it's very difficult for people to have a conversation. And what I mean by that is that in terms of what Rose just said, you used to be able to go in and maybe speak to someone. But at this point, we don't have a lot of practice doing that. And we don't have a lot of practice having the kinds of conversations that we want to have with people. So one of the things that we've been focusing on is this idea of conversational agility. So it's really not necessarily about multi-generational. It's about how do we instill a sense and teach the importance of psychological safety so that people, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what their point of view is, regardless of what their needs are, they have the ability to connect as humans, which is probably much more necessary today with the rise of AI.
Jason?
Thanks. Let me tell a story. I was walking here this morning through Morningside Park. It was slightly drizzly and lovely. And there was a gentleman in front of me, maybe 10 paces, with his ear pods in, and he was talking. And can I use profanity if I'm telling a story?
Please.
He said, I don't know what the fuck he wants from me. I already told him what my boss said 3 times, and he just stares at me with this look on his face. And I thought, that encapsulates perfectly what the experience of most managers is. They didn't make the decision, and now they have to explain the decision and deal with the repercussions of that decision across a diverse group of people, all of whom are coming to the party with a bunch of different needs and biases and uncertainties and anxieties. And it reminded me that, one of the bits that I think we miss a lot in our development of L&D or talent programs is that in our rush and our haste and our intention to build training that helps people be good leaders and good managers. Absolutely. We miss the human part of it, which is the fundamental skill necessary here. Basically, let me just put it bluntly, capitalism is traumatic. It's traumatic at scale. Right? We have the wealthiest person in the world who can make decisions about the poorest people in the world. It's traumatic at scale. It's also traumatic at the level of relationships, right? Where what we're trying to get from each other and the KPIs we're trying to reach, and it becomes transactional. What we most need, it seems to me, and you have to tell me if this resonates with you, is we need skills that are related to therapeutic trauma-informed care. We need people who know how to self-manage, who know how to deal with the flood of cortisol that hits them in a particular moment, and who know how to lower the blood pressure and the tension with other people. And it doesn't matter the generational situation. It matters whether or not I have the ability and I have done the work inside myself. I'm grounded enough to be able to deal with the incoming, no matter what it is. That's a piece I think we don't get perfectly right at Kuehne and Nagel. You've got some KN people here that can tell you, but we're working on it.
Does anyone want to add to that?
I would say, building off of that, 100% right. In a multi-generational workforce, a lot of the more senior people that we call aging out, are really aging in. And they can help a lot of the younger people because they've lived through a lot of this stuff and they have that human aspect. And there's nothing, I wrote this book called Leadership Happens in the Conversation or Not. And it is about the conversation. What are we talking about? What are we allowing others to talk about? And are we dealing with the stuff that's really on people's minds that isn't just about the work? Because when you can get to that, you then get people to be purposeful, more mindful, and more willing to do whatever you're asking them to do. And I love your story
That's
because
a skill that can be built.
it
right?
is.
Yeah.
And we so bypass that skill. It's like to be human is like, oh, well, that's the soft stuff. No, that's the hard stuff. Because if you can be human, people can relate to you. I tell this very, very quickly. One of my guys said to me, I know you had to terminate somebody, and why were they smiling when they walked out the door? Because you can do that with dignity, and somebody can go on to their greater good in the right way if you have the right conversation. So it crosses the barrier. And I think multi-generational workforces are important. I don't want a Logan Run environment.
You both bring up great points, and I think that's a nice segue to my next question around the topic of empathy. How would you advise balancing empathy versus an adherence to metrics, which is often being handed down to managers from executive leadership? So when stress levels are at an all-time high, how can managers effectively handle both aspects of their role? Jason, we'll start with you.
Did you say Jason?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Capitalism works best on a bed of empathy. Without it, the entire structure falls apart. And we're seeing, obviously, in our country, a grappling with that tension at the moment. I think, practically speaking, it goes without saying, and yet it has to be said, that the quality of one's relationships in the work context determine the outcome. We are so outcome-oriented and so driven by what we deliver at the end of a month or the end of a quarter or at the end of a project cycle that the how we get to that outcome is reduced because the outcome is the visible part. And we need to make more visible the how. Right? A Great Place to Work is one of our partners, and I was happy to hear the conversation about trust opening the day. If you're not familiar with Great Place to Work, I don't work for them, but I highly advise considering the way they talk about trust as being so multidimensional with all the subscales beneath all the topics, right? And one of the things that they pull out repeatedly in their research is the gift of presence is the simplest thing a leader can give that has it has outsized influence on whether or not an individual player on the team can contribute their best. So I think that's part of it. And then the second thing I'll say is, Rose, to your point, I'd be interested to know more about your work. Teams that tell the best stories about themselves, both personal stories and the story of the tribe, way overperform. Because they build a thing that Dan McAdams calls narrative identity. I know who I am based upon the stories I have to tell about myself. But when we move really quickly through every day and every month and every project and every deliverable, and we don't pause to tell the story of the work we did, we lose that sense of identity building. So I think part of it is presence and part of it is storytelling. There's a lot more to it, but I toss it to smarter people.
So let me just add on there, because I actually love what you're saying. This is it's an interesting phenomenon that I think a lot of companies are facing, right? Everyone wants to talk about empathy, and what a lot of leaders naturally jump to is, okay, if I'm empathetic, I then can't hold teams accountable. Yes. And I think that that's wrong. That is something that I think companies have to strike that balance. What I love about what you're saying about the presence and being in the moment, that is empathy. If you as a leader can come into a conversation and talk about how you're feeling, how your team is feeling, what are the challenges that you're facing, that does not excuse them from being held accountable for delivering and for performing. And so being able to understand that they work in connection with each other, not against each other, I think is a really important component. It's one of the things at Merck where actually it's interesting, we've just revamped our entire leadership development portfolio, if you will, and we actually took out a whole bunch of stuff on what I would kind of call your traditional leadership training, and we put everything in around how do you make a connection with your team members? How do you actually understand, whether it be multi-generational or just diverse in general, understanding that one size does not fit all is the key to making sure that you can drive accountability in your team. So how I speak to you, Jason, and connect with you is different than what I do with Kelly. That is at the crux of leadership.
I would say everybody copy-paste that. Most of our leadership development programs don't need the 20-year baggage of leadership structures and methodology. They need just human training. Yeah.
And I do think the point that you make, Beth, about the two not being mutually exclusive is really, really important.
Yeah.
Right? Empathy and performance aren't mutually exclusive, but you can't have an effective conversation with somebody about performance issues if they're not in the right state of mind and if they're not willing to listen. And it takes empathy to help create that environment, to create that situation where they can listen. And then you follow up with the performance conversation.
What's interesting about that is you can take a high bar if you've got high touch.
Yeah.
Yes.
High touch actually lends itself to a high bar. People want to please you when they feel good about you. And showing your own vulnerability. I think it's really important that leaders don't put on an armor and kind of, I hear all this talk about executive presence, and I think, what does that look like? Did it come right out of central casting? I think people need to know that you've got muddy shoes, that we all bio into this world with our brilliance and our bullshit. And we need the opportunity to show people that. And the more I raise the touch, the higher the bar goes. Yeah. So you can keep people accountable because they want to be. Yeah. And I think that's an important part of this. So you're 100% right. I love this. I think it's really good.
Could I just share one quick story? So I have responsibility for doing succession planning, and that includes CEO succession. And so we met with our board last November, and we took the time prior to meeting with our board to actually refresh our success profile for the CEO, right? 75,000 person company, big company. And as the CEO and I were working through this process, I actually stopped and said, I think maybe we have like too many soft and fuzzy qualities on this profile. And I challenged myself, and then we both kind of went back and said, you know what, no. The table stakes are the functional skills. What is the differentiator is some of the other things like servant leadership, authenticity, empathy. That's where people want to follow, and you need followership.
I think that the difficult thing, though, is that there's a professor who's actually a professor here at Columbia. His name is Adam Galinsky. A lot of the research that he talks about is that as we kind of go up the hierarchical scale, our ability to perceive others and to understand what the perspective is of the people that we're talking to and the things that they're experiencing from us goes down, that there's an inverse relationship between power and perspective taking. And so part of it is really trying to help managers understand that sometimes what they're putting out as empathy is not. And so one of the things that we try to do is give very simple structures. One of the structures that we do is called conversational turn taking, which means that we actually try to make sure that everyone is speaking an equal amount of time in meetings. We give people the questions beforehand so people can think about them if they need to. I think sometimes it's also about trying to really understand what we don't know about ourselves. And even if we think we're empathetic, sometimes we just don't have the ability to be the kinds of people that our people need us to be, and we need somebody else to help us understand that.
Kelly, you bring up a really great point that I kind of want to tap into, which is, flattened organizations, hybrid work environments, and this constantly shifting goalpost of what the business objectives are has left many managers disconnected, let's say, from their sense of purpose. So how do leaders effectively restore the meaning and effectiveness of that purpose in the day-to-day for other leadership? Because as we've seen in workforces, that tends to trickle down into the overall culture of an environment. I'll shoot it back over to you.
To me?
Yeah.
Sure. So one of the things, when I think back to, we have an app called Thrive, and it's a feedback app, and we ask people to give, not anonymous, but you can pick your raters, and your raters give feedback. Your manager gets these 6 people's feedback, and then the manager collates it, and then they give you when they have a performance conversation with you, and it's supposed to happen on a regular basis. What has happened for the past 3 years is that people pick their raters send in the feedback, and then the manager never has the conversation.
Right.
And so one of the things that we've tried to do is really, and I feel like in some ways I'm going to beat this horse twice dead, this idea of being able to have the conversation. When we ask people, what conversations are you trying to have, or what conversations do you want to learn how to have? We gave them 26 different choices in a training that we did. And 98.9% picked, my conversation is about something else. So the way that they perceive the conversation that they want to have is different from the conversations we think that they want to have. One of the things that we did was we actually, we're working with a group called Yoodly, Yoodli. It's an AI simulation tool. It's a way for us to be able to help people have rather than providing them with a script to practice, it's a way for them to practice with an AI sim, to have the conversations that they want to have using the frameworks. We actually use radical candor. When you were talking, I was thinking about ruinous empathy. But the idea being that it gives them the safe space to practice something constructive that is meaningful to them, that maybe me as a manager, I'm not aware that they need that practice, or maybe they want to have that conversation with me. But it gives them that way to practice something that none of us, every time we have a conversation, it's the first time, right? So this is a way for them to try and have that conversation beforehand and to use technology to their advantage and in their service rather than replace a human.
It's really encouraging to hear both of you talk about the way you're approaching it inside these big companies. It gives me faith that we're not sort of always missing it. But you brought up one thing that triggered me a little bit, that when I think, you mentioned that leaders are disconnected from purpose. I might go a step farther and say it's a crisis of meaning in leadership generally. And it goes down to that deeper kind of human elemental place of, why am I here? If I left this role tomorrow, someone else would slot in right behind me and nothing would change, right? And that feeling it's latent, or maybe it's visible in how leaders, how they process their concern. But one of the pieces there is helping individuals somehow find their way to their why. And it's not something you can give them. It's something they have to find on their own. And for each leader, that might take a bit of a different flavor. But I mean, what's the last time recently you've had a conversation about deeper purpose with a leader? Most of the time we're talking about skill building or something in the space of building some kind of touch, right? We're doing a training. But this is much deeper work. And maybe now this poor horse is getting beaten so many times. But I'm back to trauma-informed care and therapy now, right? It's like, how do I do the internal work to show up as a fully formed human? And part of that is knowing why I'm here. What were you thinking?
I was just going to say, sorry, I couldn't tell who you were pointing at. But I think there are two elements to what you said that strike me as interesting. I think one is you started off by asking what are some of the behaviors and skills that are needed for leaders today. And if you look at the more senior ranks, one of the things that people are yearning for is visionary leaders, right? So somebody that actually paints a clear path of where they want to go and has that clarity, and then translates it into something concrete for their teams that makes it real for them. Yep. At the individual level, so there's that capability that needs to be developed, and that's a skill that very few leaders truly possess, which includes the storytelling aspect. But at the individual level, then going into yourself, and what we find is that a lot of cases we work with clients through coaching solutions. That one-on-one coaching allows each individual then to spend time on their path that translates into their contribution to the overall vision. So what is it that I need to work on for myself in order to achieve what the company needs me to achieve and what I need to achieve for myself, to grow, to achieve my own ambitions.
So that those things are linked. You talked about hybrid environment. That's all I ever hear, and the return to office and all of this. What are we doing when they do return to the office? That's the thing I'm thinking about. If they're basically on their computers in the same way they are when they're home, then what have we done differently? I think the new off-site is the on-site, Do something meaningful. It's like getting groups of people together, to your point, Kelly, and actually having them fill each other's buckets. One of the things I do is when I work in rooms with large corporations, I have people introduce each other and tell me something that's unique about that individual. What's their gift? From the time we come out of the womb, we're being taught to improve. When is there ever a time when we're taught that we're just okay? And what's good about, and not even get into any of the constructive feedback or any of that stuff, but just to talk about somebody and that's unique. And I find people, they're wax eloquently about someone else, and that person's sitting there like, oh my God, it's more than I can even take. Do they really think that about me? And everybody's smiling and feeling so incredible. At Fast Forward, we're small. So everybody's birthday, we go around and we talk about what that person's like. And they walk out of there just high, because it's such a wonderful feeling to have people recognize what's unique about you. We do it with our kids. We just forget about it when we come to work. And we get into this whole kind of, as you said, outcome planning and KPIs and OKRs and prioritizations, and we forget what we're here for. So I think, and that point about purposeful work, I think is really important, Philipp, but at the same time do the values I have line up with the values of my company?
Absolutely. Yep.
Can I actually look at this and say, I'd be proud to go home and tell my parents about this or friends of mine? And I think we have to create that. So we talk a lot about a diverse workforce. People need to be diverse in the way they think. And we have to encourage that kind of diversity and an opportunity for people to come together when they are in the office and do something meaningful and not just show up like we used to and plow through the day.
Oh, yeah. That brings to mind something you mentioned, Philipp, that I wanted to expand on. At LHH, you're focused on building individualized journeys at scale. So how do you determine where to start with a manager, given that everybody is bringing in different skill sets and different points of views, and they're at different points in their journey? How do you ensure that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution for any given manager?
Yeah. So the wonderful thing about today is that we're at a point in time where we have a couple of things working in our favor. One is we can start every conversation with an assessment, whereas assessments used to be something that were limited to the more senior ranks. Nowadays, we start every conversation with an assessment independent of rank, and they can be a first-time manager, it can be a seasoned manager, it's all the same. Doing that assessment helps us understand where the individual's at, and most important, it gives the individual an opportunity to understand where they're at, because development is impossible without self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And so having that self-awareness of where am I today, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, and also understanding where I want to grow as an individual helps me tremendously. I also get the benefit of having the insight from others around me. How does my manager think about me and feel about me, and where are we aligned, where do we have differences? So that gives us a phenomenal starting point to determine where do we want to focus our time and attention. The second piece that we have working for us, that we're in an environment where coaching has become democratized. So we can now, actually, we've talked about it a couple of times, we've touched on this individual learning path, right, and tailored paths. We can have these one-on-one conversations in a way that we couldn't in the past, which gives us the flexibility to say, okay, I know what your starting point is, I know what your issues are, challenges are, and what your ambitions are, and I can work with you in a very specific and targeted way. That doesn't mean that we ignore the companies and organizations' needs and requirements, because one of the nice things about doing this as well is I can identify what are some of the commonalities across certain cohorts. What are some of the risks and opportunities that I see? Where do I have flight risk in particular groups? Where do I have other pain points and issues that are being raised? And how do I use the coaching environment to help address those? But I can still very much target it at the individual.
Kelly, I'd love to hear from you in terms of how any of that might resonate with what's happening in your organization.
Sure. I hate to go back to AI again, but we actually use AI coaching. We have 3 different levels of coaching. One is we use BetterUp, and BetterUp is still an in-person but online coaching solution. You access it through an app. But we also use another company called Valence, and Valence's AI character is called Nadia. And Nadia is built into so many of the tools that we use. So if you are trying to write to your manager, Nadia can be there to help write. If you want to have a conversation about what just happened in the room that you're uncomfortable with, Nadia, you can type to Nadia. And Nadia is actually informed by all of I have a program called HI. HI is a management and leadership program that really leans into the skills that help make us irreplaceable. We talked about empathy, we talked about conversations, but it's really a way of, for us, the way that we're trying to get at empathy at scale and development at scale is we're trying to use AI for the moments when someone needs it, when we're not present, but at the same time teach people how to use AI for other things to free them up so they have time to have those conversations. When you asked about the urgent needs, time poverty, people don't have time. So how can we teach people how to use AI in ways that will help get them back time? So that, and while we're teeing up the idea that, the best way to spend your time is developing your people, having a conversation. So we're trying to use AI to get us back to humanity.
Is anyone else's organization successfully using AI to foster better team dynamics? I know we're very much in its infancy in terms of people development, but that's a great example of how it might be used for good.
Yeah, it sounds like I need Nadia in my life, but we are experimenting in the space, particularly in the coaching aspect, and trying to do something which is just in time, where if you're in a situation and you need that help, you're able to do that. We've not quite, I'm going to say, feel like we're at a point where we can launch it yet, so we're in test mode, but sounds like Kelly and I will be having follow-up conversations.
The number one use of ChatGPT now, you know what it is?
Yeah.
It's therapy, right? It's moved. Last year it was functionality stuff, and now it's I need somebody to talk to, right, to process. And so because that's already naturally happening, I often wonder, if you have a strong IT product group who's working on your AI applications, and I'm sure they've got some moonshots there, you're doing some cool R&D stuff for your customers or whatever, but I hope we can steer some of that effort into solving some really simple problems in our organization. So, for instance, let's just take an example. All the survey data from whatever survey you want to use, let's take Great Place to Work, will tell you communication, which came up in the previous presenter's slide, is the number one thing. And it's such a difficult topic because it's so big and has so many, what do you mean by communication? But this is almost always true. This is what the Great Place to Work data shows. Communication will always come back as the top 2 or 3 things people hate or are concerned about. Right. And then no matter what you do, you don't get better. You do more town halls, you do email newsletters, you do focus groups, whatever, and it doesn't work. It's because, generally, what the subscales say, is it's because when people say they're not happy with communication, what they really mean are vastly different things than what we think they mean. But one of the things they mean is that they don't get enough of just the exchange, of the dialogue and the discourse, and part of that is time poverty. But part of it is also that our managers get messages cascaded to them through a very old-fashioned model, and it's a game of corporate telephone. By the time it reaches people at shop floor, at the edges of the organization, it's vastly different than probably the strategic intention of the message before. And the manager doesn't own any of that content and so can't really defend it. So for instance, a really simple application that our IT product group is working on is, what if you set the GPT on top of a really stable knowledge base of your strategy content, your communication, whoever runs marketing comm, internal comm stuff at your organization. And you're asking this chatbot questions to clarify, how can I talk about this? Give me an anecdote. Connect this to my function in my team. Give me some FAQs and let me play devil's advocate with you. Practice, maybe not to the level of your sophistication where you're talking with like a really evolved AI agent, but you've got a light agent, right? I think there are simple places like that win time, that boost confidence, that increase consistency and clarity, but we just have to steer our intentionality in that direction. Whether we've done it yet or not.
Well, and it's forcing the conversation. So one of the applications we are using is we're using AI on top of our survey data that then serves up to people managers that says, you don't need to spend an hour reading through literally 120,000 comments.
That's right.
Here's your themes, here's some questions. By the way, here's 3 slides you can use with your team. Now go engage and solution rather than sort of talking about what you think the problem is, because we've served it up for you.
And that's where it really saves time.
Yeah.
Because it's augmenting the intelligence that you
Yes.
already have.
Yeah.
A lot of times you can take a series of 360 feedback,
Yep.
whatever you're getting in surveys, whatever output comes out of a meeting, throw it all in, ask some very intelligent prompts, and you get a real thematic opportunity. Nothing replaces the human conversation, right, that you're going to have around that stuff. So people always say, there just isn't enough time. You know, time is interesting. I don't think we have less time today. I know everybody thinks we do. I don't think we do. I think we use time less today. I think we need to put more emphasis on creating time, actually creating the conditions that AI and stuff like that can relieve us of some of the perfunctory things that took so much time and leave some time for us to have those human conversations, to participate in a way that's real, and spend less time on the stuff that doesn't make any sense anymore, and more time on what we can actually learn from people and how we can engage in a conversation and go in suspending judgment and literally being in a consideration stage. I think that's really important. I don't think leaders have to know everything. I think they have to be willing to learn.
I think the hard part is, though, that the things that we spend time on are generally the things we pride ourselves on, right? Like, I can make a really awesome deck. I can analyze a spreadsheet like nobody's business. But it's really about how do you start to help managers understand that stuff is not as important as it once was.
Exactly.
And if that's the source of your pride, you have to shift it to something else.
Exactly.
And then, like, how do you make the case, again, going back to empathy, that empathy is an enabler. Empathy, if you want to go fast, if you want to save time, it's build trust, right? Because the trust is like, it allows you to speak in a shorthand to people that, before you might have to explain everything. Now it's like they understand because they get you, they can move faster. So it's really about, for us, we've been trying to do that, is really shift the conversation from, we know that you were really good at this. And there's a tool that can do it better than you can. So now, what are you going to do? If you want to keep moving forward, you have to shift your attention to people. You have to shift your attention to developing the people and spending your time having the conversation.
Yeah, well said.
So we only have a few minutes left. So I do want to end with a couple of closing questions and would love to hear from you all. Briefly, what excites you the most about the future of leadership and management development, based on all the things that we've discussed in today's conversations between the future of AI and nurturing existing people skills? Rose, we'll start with you.
Beth, you spoke about bringing in artists and very different.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, because that was intriguing to me.
Yeah, so what Rose is referring to is we tried something a little bit new last year, and it's taken off so much so that we have season 2 going on this year, and we're calling it Leadership Readiness Labs. And we are a scientifically based company. So when you go to a scientist and say, do you want to hear from a conductor of an orchestra? They're like, no, that has nothing to do with my business. But it does. Because what we've done is we run these 1-hour labs where we bring an external speaker in. We've had an astronaut, we've had a conductor, We had Andy Murray's mom talk about how she coached him.
I think it's great.
Right? I mean,
think
it
it's
was
great.
crazy. And what was fascinating about it is it was all about the human element of making a connection and leading teams. And 75,000, well, I should probably say 15,000 people managers have rallied around this. They're like, we can't not do them because they're so waiting. And we ground it in a leadership skill that's important to us. So this last quarter was on entrepreneurship. Next quarter is going to be on innovation. And we're showing them how leadership can have a business impact by bringing in some of those human elements. So that's what I'm most excited about.
And this is a pharmaceutical company doing this.
A
And
century
it's
old
like,
one at that.
I think that's what excites me about the future of leadership is where can we take it? How can we look at it so differently than when we grew up? I grew up with central casting, as I call it. And the last thing I want to be is the person that comes out of central casting. So here's that opportunity, bring in very unusual pharmaceutical company, an orchestra conductor, or an artist, or somebody that just thinks about things differently. I went to one thing where they had a caddy, a golf caddy, at the Honda Classic, talking about what he needed to do to lead these other caddies in these professional golf tournaments. And you can learn a lot from that. I mean, it's just, so it's nice to be able to disrupt your thinking with something uniquely different. And I was thinking, Mona Lisa Smile was an old movie. And she brings in them to see a Jackson Pollock painting, and they're like throwing up all over it. And she said, I didn't ask you to like it, just consider it. I think that's a unique way of looking at leadership. Don't like it, consider it.
I feel like Rose and Beth have given me an alley-oop, so I have to say it. So I leave Kuehne and Nagel at the end of the year. I love them, been a great run, super. They're gonna be a consulting client next year. But I'm launching a company called the Tomorrow Company. And its primary value proposition is removing leaders from the places they're in to put them in context where they can confront their humanity and their connectedness with the wild world in different ways. So we have wild Mustangs on our 39 acres in Virginia, and we bring them on site. Last year, we took them to a farm in Switzerland, a procurement team, global finance, digital sales and marketing, functions that you would think, why are you taking them to a farm to investigate how cattle are cared for? Or why are you asking them to go work with you on a working ranch and shovel manure with Mustangs for a day? Or why are we walking in a forest talking to forest stewards? And it's because the wild and the ecosystems of the natural world teach us so much about how healthy, sustainable, thriving, adaptable, resilient dynamics can be built in-house. So this is just a second, in a big way, what they're saying. This is an exciting space.
Totally. Kelly?
Sure. I hate having to follow you, Jason, all the time. But I guess, when I spent my whole career trying to, being a person who deeply cares about other people, but trying to also learn how to speak the language of business so that I could make people who had the budget care about people, or at least do the things that I thought would result in better lives. But I feel like AI gives us this chance to start talking about humanity in a way that we haven't been able to. So it allows me in some ways to be myself for the first time. That's what I'm excited about.
I got to say that the stories that you shared, love them. Phenomenal to see. I agree with you in terms of bringing in the humanity through AI, and I think I've mentioned it before, we've touched on it a few times, being able to bring it down to the individual level, on a very personal level, figuring out what does my journey look like for me, for myself, first and foremost, before I think about the organization, before I think about the company, and then incorporating that into the journey of the company. AI helps reinforce that because we now have tools that give us the flexibility to do that at an individual level. So I think exciting times ahead.
Wonderful. Jason, Beth, Kelly, Philipp, Rose, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.